Prime Minister's coming in a minute, so I'll get right out of your way. Okay.
You obviously go back a long way. Knew Jim Carr from back in the 80s.
Yeah, Jim and I go back from our first year of university together, and we've been a long-time friend. We were political friends. We were political companions in trying to work for Manitoba, for Canada, for Winnipeg. Great guy, great man. He'll be missed. He was truly inspirational to all of us, and he left a lot of legacies behind him that all of us have got to pick up into.
You described him as a political friend, even though he was an opponent.
Yeah, but you know, this is a small town. You're friends with some of your competitors in the media. You know, it's not that we're all working together for our country and for our community, and that's the way Jim and I grew up together.
Is there a memory that stands out for you?
He worked for the National Film Board when I was working for Bond Street Detention Center, and he brought films over. We were both in first year university, and we were friends ever since then. So we go back longer than we'd like to admit.
Can you just introduce yourself for our colleagues in Toronto who are listening live?
Oh, I'm Gary Dooley.
Thank you very much.
Former Premier.
Thank you very much.
I has been. Thank you.
You're looking well.
Hey, Austin, get on this case, huh?
Good morning, Prime Minister. Is there a memory of Mr. Carr that you would like to share with us? Something that stands out?
Obviously, the tributes have been extraordinary all week. People touched by his thoughtfulness and generosity. One of the things that I've been reflecting on is he was always such a good friend to me. He was always there with counsel. He was always checking in on how I was doing. He was incredibly thoughtful. And I kind of felt special because he gave me so much attention. And what we've seen over the past week is he did that for everyone. He was, all parliamentarians who got up with their tributes talked about how personally engaged he was with each of them. People from all different backgrounds and parts of the country talking about how he was there and thoughtful and helpful and always passionate about this country and how what he could serve. It was just, he was extraordinary. And we are bereft, but we are better for having known him, for having had him serve this country. C'était un homme extraordinaire, profond, passionné, réfléchi. Et il avait le don de toujours me faire sentir spécial. Il était toujours attentionné par rapport à moi, il me donnait des beaux conseils, il était extrêmement présent. Mais là, cette semaine, on découvre qu'il était comme ça avec tout le monde. Et c'est aucune surprise parce que c'était une personne si généreuse, mais c'est une réflexion à avoir sur comment on a un impact sur les gens autour de nous. Si on peut apprendre de Jim, le monde serait un endroit bien meilleur.
What are your thoughts about Jim that he spent the last 2 years and continued to serve his country?
He had so much to contribute to this country. And cancer robbed him of a number of years that he would have continued to have an impact in Winnipeg, across the prairies, across the country. And he wasn't going to waste a minute of the time he was given. Being in the House days before he passed to make sure that his bill on the prairie economy got passed. This was something he said, no, I'm going to use every minute in service. He just went to the Prime Minister.
En français, quel hommage peut-on rendre à Jim Carr que vous avez effectué le déplacement spécialement pour cette cérémonie?
Jim se vouait au service des autres. Il était toujours là pour nous. Nous sommes tous là pour lui aujourd'hui.
The turnout here today.
Okay, how are we doing for today?
Yeah, I would like to.
Good morning. Good morning. Is there, maybe we can start with a memory of Jim Carr that stands out to you?
When I became Minister of Natural Resources, it was unusual not to have somebody from the Prairie as Minister of Natural Resources. So I was smart enough to ask for Jim's counsel and Ralph Goodale and Amarjeet Sohi as former ministers of natural resources and all from Alberta, from Manitoba, from Saskatchewan. And we started meeting, and they would advise me. And we went on once a week, and then another week, and another week, and it went on for 3 years. 3 years every week, I would talk to Jim Carr about energy, about environment, about national unity, about myself, about himself, about life. And he didn't make Monday's call. And I didn't know why. And then his son called me afterwards, but he was working to the end. Jim Carr understood the bigness of this country. He understood how big it is and how sometimes we're going to make compromises, but that doesn't mean that we aren't principled. And he taught me so much about life and friendship, and he was just such an outstanding guy. It's a shock. We knew he was sick, but we didn't know how sick to the end, and didn't know he got his private member's bill through. I guess there was a sense of relief, and he left us. That's an incredible thing. And what a legacy, what a life. What an amazing, optimistic, big man, proud Canadian, proud of everything that he was and that his family was. He was an unbelievable friend. Unbelievable mentor role. I learned more from Jim Carr. And Amarjeet and Ralph and I will miss those phone calls with him every week for 3 years. It was a marvelous thing. He was a marvelous man.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Looks like everyone's going in.
Yeah, let's go.
Carry this. Yeah, I think we're good. Thanks for that, Jeff.
I'll say something on behalf of First Nations.
I guess you could just report this. Not the teacher. Sorry, just one second. Can you just start by introducing yourself, please?
Yeah, for sure. My name is Cindy Woodhouse. I'm with the Assembly of First Nations. I'm the regional chief here in Manitoba. And my condolences to all of Jim's family.
Did you work with him at all on the bill that he got passed through just recently, the energy bill for Prairies?
Certainly in the past, we've always worked on many issues on reconciliation. The Truth and Reconciliation Calls to Action. Other things that we worked on was UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the Languages Bill. I know him and his son, who also worked in the House of Commons, Ben, worked on the Indigenous Languages Bill, and I know that we always had his support, his unwavering support for First Nations and trying to change this country has been, he's going to be missed. He was such a progressive thinker and a dear friend.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
His brothers and sisters-in-law, Al and Fern, Robert and Sean, his children and their partners, Rachel and Sean, Daniel and Mariana, Ben and Amy, Rebecca, Jesse and Manya, Kiernan and Ainsley, as well as his 3 grandchildren, to whom he was Zadie, Sophia, Markianne, Michelle. Also worth mentioning, of course, many nieces, nephews, cousins, and dear, dear friends. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel once said, "There are 3 ways to mourn. The first is to cry, the second is to grow silent, the third is to transform sorrow into song." I have no doubt we will cover all 3 over the course of this memorial service this morning. And we thank you again for your attendance and your support. Our first musicians are Carl Stobie on violin, Tracy Wright on oboe, and Leanne Regier-Lee on harpsichord. Performing for us a piece entitled, the second movement of a piece entitled Concerto for Oboe and Violin by renowned composer J.S. Bach. Thank you again to our musicians, Carl Stobie, Tracy Wright, and Leanne Regier-Lee, who generously offered to play this morning in Jim's memory. The centerpiece of a Jewish memorial service is the funeral, the eulogy, known in Hebrew as the hesped. A chance, as we mentioned before, to pay tribute and celebrate the person who has passed. I'm going to call up Ben Carr now, Jim's son, to deliver a eulogy in honor of his father.
Thank you for joining with us today in honor of my father. How fitting it is to do this here at the concert hall, a place he loved so much. To all who have flown in on short notice from out of town, we are deeply grateful. As I look into this diverse audience, I can see, looking back at me, proof of a life well lived. He was born James Gordon Carr. To his friends and family, he held many names. Most notable among them were Dad, Zadie, Professor Friendly, and of course, Jimmy. Although Jimmy was an exclusivity that was broadened in 2015 following his appointment to cabinet, when he would say, "Please, call me Minister Jimmy." He came from a large yet close-knit family. His brothers Al and Robert were very special to him. He and Robert were exceptionally close. Like their mother Esther and her sister Fran, they were best friends, and their affection for one another was visible in every interaction they had. He had a very close relationship with his mother Esther and took after her in many ways. He thought about her often, along with his grandparents. He would recall how much they sacrificed and endured to provide our family with the strong foundation we have been able to build upon since their arrival in Canada. His father David died many years ago, but Dad spoke of him fondly, and particularly of his kindness and intellect. Dad talked frequently of his deep love and appreciation for his cousins. He saw them as brothers and sisters, relishing in every opportunity to sip scotch, dine, or converse together. Passover and Rosh Hashanah gatherings over the years were favorites of his because they brought us all together. Dad spoke glowingly and proudly of his great-uncle David, a World War II veteran who survived nearly 4 years in a Japanese prisoner of war camp and went on to become the first Jewish deputy minister in the federal government. A portrait of Uncle David hangs on the wall of Dad's parliamentary office in Ottawa. Dad was proud to be Jewish and saw this as central to his identity. My father loved me and my sisters, Rachel and Becky. We have always known that. Each of us shared our own unique bonds with him, rooted in a mutual love of sport, food, travel, music, and one another. It was just last week that Becky traveled with Dad to Ottawa. She took care of him as he crossed the finish line on his private member's bill. He cherished this time. Traveling with his kids was always a source of joy for Dad. In 1993, he took my sister Rachel to the first 2 games of the World Series in Toronto, a memory that I know they held on to dearly. He always remarked that he and Rachel had the same brain. They processed things the same way and often knew what the other was going to say before it was said. He had a loving relationship with his stepchildren, Daniel, Jesse, and Kieran, and in recent years, with their partners. The 6 of us have deep affection for one another. It is rooted in the love that Dad and Colleen have for us. To Georgia, the family's beloved doodle dog, he was a loyal and loving companion. Dad and Colleen worked hard to find ways to bring us all together. Their purchase of a house in Todos Santos was to be a place that did just that. When we gather there in the years to come, we will feel him in the warmth of the sun that we share and reflect on how much he would have loved being there with us. In recent years, his heart became fuller with the birth of his grandchildren, Sophia, Michelle, and Markia, with whom some of his most precious moments were spent. Just last month, the Prime Minister welcomed me, Dad, Daniel, Mariana, and Sophia into his office, where we spent a few special minutes together, When Sophia came home, she proudly proclaimed that she had met the King of Canada with Zadie. Dad had an endearing quality about him that involved a love of everyday objects, many of which he gave a proper name. His latest car was Pierre. His cane was Mabel. He loved Old Reliable, the boat at Caddy Lake, a name he optimistically bestowed upon it. Old Reliable was his happy place, even when it wouldn't start. We kids respected how committed he was to being a normal guy. He never saw himself as better than anyone. He was the opposite of a snob. We loved to tease him. For example, it was a mystery to his family, immediate and extended, how a guy with such musical ability could be so bad a dancer. We let him know it, and we did so often. Dad was born on October 11th, 1951. 35 years later, on the very same day, I was born. The sharing of a birthday was just one of the special pieces of a larger fabric that wove our lives together. We would spend countless hours talking about world affairs, and then abruptly, at the same time in a conversation, we would both say, "Okay, that's good, talk to you later," and hang up the phone. We knew each other so well. Dad was a gifted musician. He began his musical career early while a student at Montrose Elementary and Grant Park High School. He was introduced to the oboe by his then musical idol, and ultimately lifelong friend, his music teacher, Leonard Tukoski. Only a few years later, after picking up the oboe, at the young age of 16, he was playing professionally with the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra on this very stage. I suspect there was more than one Alberta oil and gas lobbyist shaking in their boots when the headline in the morning of November 4th, 2015 read, "Oboist becomes Minister of Natural Resources." Music was a passion he carried with him until the end, as the sounds of Beethoven and other greats played in his ears over his last few days. It was exactly what he wanted. Dad grew up with the lessons of the Depression taught by my grandparents fresh in his mind, primarily the concept of, let's call it, resourcefulness. This would manifest itself in many ways. Anyone who had the pleasure to enjoy one of his home-cooked meals, for example, was required to patiently listen as he thoughtfully broke down the individual cost of every ingredient used to prepare the meal as we ate. So let's just think about this for a minute. He'd say, there's 6 of us, chicken 20, the potatoes about $5.50, bread was $3.75, soup was $6, not to mention the seasoning, and that piece of parsley. Divide that by the number of people at the table, factor in how many days of leftovers we'll have, and that's what I call a deal. He also had a goofy side. Sometimes we would communicate only in a Kennedy accent for minutes on end, much to the chagrin of anyone around, like my sister Rachel, who had to contend with it for literally hours during one memorable road trip. Dad would weave that accent routinely and seamlessly into any conversation as he saw fit. You ask him how his day was, you might get this in response. It was a good day. We did great things for the country, and you should be proud. He had a lovely voice, and when we were young, he used it often to sing us to sleep, to folk classics such as James Taylor's Sweet Baby James or Paul Simon's American Tune. Amazing, his 2-year-old granddaughter Michelle knows every word to Sweet Baby James already and sings it with a twinkle in her eye that lights up at the sound of the first note. To many of his friends, he was Pistol, a nickname he got from having his arm stuck in a sling after breaking his collarbone, leaving him looking like a Western movie star reaching for his holster. Dad was blessed to have friendships with people he had known virtually all of his life. For us kids, they were like another set of uncles. In particular, Dan Diamond, Sam Malkin, and Reg Pratt were special figures who loomed large in our lives. As a family, we've been so blessed to develop our own relationships with Dad's friends, many of you whom are here today. Your company in the days, weeks, and years to come will undoubtedly bring us great comfort and offer beautiful reminders of our collective memories with him. Dad knew everybody. When you went for lunch with him at Bernstein's Deli, which many of us did, you weren't just having lunch with him, you were eating with the whole restaurant. Dad believed strongly in public service and in our collective responsibility to look after one another. He instilled this in his kids from an early age and extended it to those who worked with him. He never missed the opportunity to turn something into a learning moment. For me, these were lessons learned from listening, watching, and talking with him over the years. It's about additions, not subtractions, my boy, he would say. You have to listen to people, be interested in their lives, find ways to connect with them, be open-minded and curious to learn more. I can remember one day when I was young, a group of Jehovah's Witnesses came to the door. 2 hours later, they were still in our living room, sitting on the couch, talking to Dad. I asked him recently why he did that. It wasn't about me trying to be swayed by them or them by me, he said. It was about opening myself up to see the world from a different perspective. The same lesson was delivered when I asked him why he seemed to be such good friends with Gary Dewar and Gary Filmon, both political rivals during his time in the Manitoba legislature. They were the bad guys, after all, weren't they? Whether he knew it or not, he was teaching us that just because you don't see the world the same way or agree on every issue, it doesn't mean that there isn't room for friendship and mutual respect from one person to another. He could hear and see beyond the noise and distractions that always lingered in the background of the political arena, and in doing so, he would find the commonalities through the humor, respect, and courtesy that one needs to build meaningful relationships with people on a human level. It didn't take long for him to become admired and relied upon by his colleagues. He was reasonable, generous, thoughtful, and well-considered in his interactions with them. He developed a reputation as a strong cabinet committee chair, capable of bridging divides and building consensus around difficult issues. Much of this came as a result of his tireless work ethic. In 2015, shortly after he was elected to Parliament, I made the decision to move to Ottawa to work for Mélanie Joly. We lived together, Dad and I, in his condo on Laurier Avenue, a place that he loved. We would wake up together in the morning, straighten each other's ties, and talk about the day ahead. He would finish that day, usually 12 or 14 hours long, having worked non-stop through meeting after meeting, and come home to read hundreds of pages of cabinet documents to prepare for the next day, not before having a scotch in between, of course. Never once did he take the job for granted, and it showed in his successes. He was exceptionally well served by dozens of staffers over the years, each of whom he admired and appreciated. His longest-serving staffer and close friend, Jeff Kavalik-Plouffe, was never far, and they enjoyed a deep and rich bond. Dad lived by the words of our dear Auntie Fran. It all comes down to attitude, she would say. The glass must always be half full, be full of life. He was set to give a speech on Wednesday in the House of Commons. It was to be a farewell address that would afford him the opportunity to share his reflections as a parliamentarian. We talked about what he was going to say, a few lines of which I can read for you now. Mr. Speaker, as I rise today and stand on the floor of this chamber for what may be the last time, my spirit is as strong as ever, bolstered by the inspiration I have drawn from recent moments in this House and the kindness poured into me by all of you. I'd like to share a few observations, if I may, learned over the course of a lifetime. Never stop learning. Keep an open mind. Speak only when you have taken the time to consider your words carefully. Treat the moment in which you choose to speak them with equal care. Seek to build bridges and consensus. Add chairs around the dinner table. Most importantly, Mr. Speaker, be kind to each other. My dad never got to speak those words, But having heard all of the wonderful tributes pouring in from colleagues over this past week, it is clear that he was able to convey those lessons to them without having to put them to words. My dad was tough. I mean, really, really tough. He campaigned with kidney failure and cancer running through him for over 30 days in 2019. He ended election night by giving an upbeat victory speech in front of a large crowd before going to the hospital for the night. The very next morning, we received his diagnosis. Over the course of the past 3 years, he had dialysis. It was 2, sometimes 3 times a week, 4 hours each time. He had a stem cell transplant in the middle of a pandemic, alone in isolation for a month-long recovery that did not allow for a single visitor. He came home, and while recovering, remained committed to service and eventually made his way back into the cabinet. He did everything in his power to make sure that he could be with us for as long as possible, because he loved us and he loved life. In the past few weeks, he traveled back and forth to Ottawa on numerous occasions to give speeches in the House of Commons in support of his private member's bill, legislation that seeks to put the prairies at the forefront of an emerging green economy. He did not need to be there in person. He could have debated, spoken, and listened virtually, but he wanted to be there. He wanted to hear, feel, and see the conversations that he was having with colleagues. On December 7th, that bill passed through the House of Commons, and his final moments there saw him surrounded by people he loved, in a place he loved, working to improve the well-being of everyone from the region that he loved. I am so thrilled to inform you that on Thursday, his bill received royal assent, meaning it has passed through the Senate and is now officially Canadian law. Your work is done on that front. He taught us so much about how to live when you are dying. In recent months, and especially in his last few days, my dad and our family were served with exceptional love, care, and support given to us by the palliative team. They kept him comfortable. They reassured us that everything would be okay and that he was resting peacefully. They provided him with the comfort that he needed to know that his wishes could be met. That is, that he would be given the ability to go out on his own terms. Through their magnificent kindness and care, he did just that. Colleen, you brightened each of his days. Through all of the sadness and challenges we had to endure as a family over the past 3 years, the strength, love, and dedication you showed to our dad left him and leaves us eternally grateful. He loved you so much. I know that he was deeply grateful to have in you a partner with whom he could share the things that mattered most in life. You supported him unequivocally in his pursuits, and in that way allowed him to realize so many of his dreams. Of all the things he was to people he came across in life, to me, he was always simply Dad, a larger-than-life figure whose impact on me is unrivaled. He breathed life into all of us. He did so through his courage, wisdom, and love. In the years to come, we will see him ever and always present in the world around us, through the way we will look at a situation, hear a whispered word of wisdom from his voice within us, feel the courage and strength needed to persevere through a difficult moment. He will be there. Our favorite Paul Simon song to sing and listen to together was American Tune. The last line of that beautiful song serves as a symbol of the deepest of bonds that he and I shared. It is a fitting way to end. It reads, "It's all right, it's all right. You can't be forever blessed. Still, tomorrow's going to be another working day, and I'm trying to get some rest. You can rest now, sweet baby James." Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. We will now hear Sweet Baby James, played for us by Jesse Gange.
Is a young cowboy, he lives on the range. His horse and his cattle are his only companions. He works in the saddle and he sleeps in the canyon, waiting for summer, his pastures to change. And as the moon rises, he sits by his fire, thinking about women and glasses of beer. Closing his eyes as the doggies retire, he sings out a song which is soft but it's clear, as if maybe someone could hear. Good night, you moonlight ladies, rock-a-bye, sweet baby James. Deep greens and blues are the colors I choose. Won't you let me go down in my dreams? And rock-a-bye, sweet baby James. Now the 1st of December was covered with snow, and so was the turnpike from Stockbridge to Boston. Lord, the Berkshires seem dreamlike on account of that frosting, with 10 miles behind me and 10,000 more to go. And there's a song that they sing when they take to the highway, a song that they sing when they take to the sea, a song that they sing of their home in the sky. Maybe you can believe it if it helps you to sleep, but singing works just fine for me. Well, good night, you moonlight ladies, rock-a-bye, sweet baby James. Deep greens and blues are the colors I choose. Won't you let me go down in my dreams? And rock-a-bye, sweet baby James. Oh, good night, you moonlight ladies, rock-a-bye, sweet baby James. Deep green and blues are the colors I choose. Won't you let me go down in my dreams? And rock-a-bye, sweet baby James.
Thank you, Jesse. Beautiful. Lloyd Axworthy is not just a distinguished politician, but for Jim Carr, he was a longtime friend and confidant. It is now my honor to call forward the Honourable Lloyd Axworthy.
Good morning. Let me begin by first acknowledging Her Honor, Lieutenant Governor, Prime Minister, members of cabinets, both federal and provincial, members of caucus, legislatures, parliaments, Mayor of Winnipeg, Gillingham, members of council, and family and friends. I think that's pretty much all the protocols that we can provide at the time. I want to begin with some words that I think give a sense of what this morning's about. One must wait until the evening to see how splendid the day has been. It really tells us that as we gather here today, joined in our sorrow, it's a chance to reflect upon the splendid political life of Jim Carr. As we've heard in House of Commons, Prime Minister MPs from all parties pay tribute to this special man. Messages of condolence and love to Colleen and the family have streamed in from across Canada, in fact, across the borders into other areas, just showing the scope and reach of the impact that Jim had. And this morning in this hall, there's a palpable outpouring, you can feel it, of love and affection. And we're all grateful for this time to engage in an act of communion, sharing our thoughts and our prayers in what is surely the most precious of human moments, affirming the journey from this world to the next. In her poem, When Death Comes, Mary Oliver meditates on death and reminds us of the importance of life well lived. When it's over, I don't want to wonder if I have made of my life something particular and real. I don't want to find myself sighing and frightened or full of argument. I don't want to end up simply having visited this world. Jim Carr was no tourist. He was uniquely explorer, adventurer, leader, a mensch, sharing his world with his passions, his values, and his dreams. As we've learned from Ben's opening remarks, music was one of his great loves. I believe that Jim was the first oboe player ever elected to the Parliament of Canada. And as a musician, he brought a sense of harmony and how to create a team aiming at a symphonic melody that applied to politics may seem just a little awkward to some of you, but you only had to know Jim to see how he could weave that kind of understanding of how music makes the soul stand still. Prime Minister, you may want to check out symphony orchestras to find other oboe players for candidates in the next election. He took those talents that have been so beautifully described to all kinds of endeavors. As a member of the legislature, he was one of Manitoba's foremost leaders on the question of constitutional change. As a Free Press editorialist, he wrote about human rights. As the founder and president of the Manitoba Business Council, he pioneered the ideas of a significant surge of immigration as part of our responsibility, and initiated private sector support for programs for inner-city Indigenous children. He was, as his friend, the Honorable Melanie Jolie, related to me, a charmer who made friends easily. But she said he was also competitive. Both are ardent hockey fans, as you know, and she and Jim respectively tell of the superiority of the hometown teams, the Habs and the Jets. She reported how after a bitter loss in a matchup last year, Jim conceded defeat by delivering a very big package of ice-packed Goldoi to her constituency office. Her Rays weren't quite sure what was in the box because of a certain aroma that arose. But as I checked the history, I discovered that when the Jets won the next game, he received a box full of brisket from Deli Schwartz in Montreal as a fair quid pro quo. In 15 different elections, he and I shared campaigning door to door in the central south part of Winnipeg. I would watch with awe how in virtually every encounter he'd come upon a second cousin, a former teacher, a local businessman that was related to him. They would engage in the natural conversation of how Winnipeg is only half a degree of separation. He was master of the hood when it came to campaigning. And I saw in a Facebook message a day or so ago, this by Joanne Drobot, I think that makes the point. She says, Jim Carr visited me in 2006. He was canvassing for an election. I invited him in to chat. He convinced me of the power of a single vote. Parentheses, I haven't voted in 10 years, but I haven't missed the opportunity since. My condolences to his family. There was the voice of one Canadian amongst many who kind of caught that special, splendid personality of Jim Carr. Jim was also a patriot in the true sense of the word. In his final speech, as we know, he said he loved every square meter of Canada. Here in the Prairies, we remember his deep feelings. And what better way, as Ben pointed out, to honor that kind of deep, abiding commitment was the passage of the Green Prairie Economy legislation, which is more than just a bill in the House. It's an affirmation of Jim's very deep belief of how the federal government must be a strong presence in the West. His greatest gift to me, as it was to many in this room that we've talked to, was his friendship, lasting more than 50 years, and I'd like to share with you, recall a few of the high points. Quite a few years ago, in fact, over 40, Phil Fontaine, who was then our Grand Chief in Manitoba, and Jim and I were paddling the waters of the Assiniboine River on Dakota territory. And we were invited by the community to share in a sweat lodge. It led to a rare moment of insight and renewal. Each of us had to speak our inner thoughts. Jim spoke of his pride in being grandson of immigrants from Russia and the trials of settling in the hard scrabble of the prairie soil. I spoke of my time as the child of a soldier who was at war in Europe for the first 6 years of my life. Phil, of his experience in the residential school. After the sweat, we We lay back on the grass remarking how clear, bright, sharp were our perceptions. It was like being reborn, realizing the magic of a moment that brought us together, sharing deep thoughts of our respective prairie upbringings and the importance of understanding the injustice to Indigenous people. Jim said, "This is a time of special bonding, making us brothers who will always be there for each other." One can never forget a moment like that. And Jim never did. He became a champion of Indigenous rights and reconciliation. He negotiated the transfer of the railways in the Port of Churchill to the Indigenous Northerners in this province. In his last year, he became a champion of the act of reconciliation, the transfer of ownership that the Prime Minister attended, where after 350 years, property was returned to an Indigenous community. Chief Jerry Daniels of SCO wrote me to say that he was so grateful for Jim's service. Jim was also a convener of ideas and people, bridge builder you can call him. Denise and I were really delighted one time when Jim and Colleen proposed a book club. As you many know, a favorite indoor pastime for Winnipeggers. They brought together 4 couples with very different opinions, interests, and outlooks. Jim was the listener in that book club. He wanted to understand other people's point of view and get to the point of sort of digging in a little bit more to understand. I remember after reading the novel The Lemon Tree, he concluded that this tale of how a Palestinian and an Israeli became close friends. And he concluded that it showed that the friendship was a metaphor for our time. I do have to report his greatest disappointment was not being able to, despite repeated efforts, to convince us to read the biography of Sir John A. Macdonald. Over the years, the two of us, in company with others, just alone, had meaningful conversations. Our final one took place on a quiet Sunday afternoon in our living room 2 weeks before he died. We agreed that the usual wee drop of malt scotch was called for in the circumstance. And Jim talked about his pending legislation, how grateful he was of the colleagues in the House and Senate being cooperative, the help of his staff, people in the constituency, ideas that he had picked up when he's a special representative by the Prime Minister in the West. He hoped that his constituents would remember him as a dedicated public servant, a person of integrity, one in the line of Manitoba politicians like Duff Robin, who brought common sense and dignity to the office. As Ben mentioned, he was going to try in his last House appearance to leave a message of his love for Canada and the promise this country has in this difficult time of need. Then the conversation turned. Jim wanted to talk about the reality of the short time left to him. He was forthcoming and tranquil, showing the spirit of someone who had prepared for the end with care and composure. But he wasn't without feelings of sadness. He said, "My greatest regret is leaving Colleen. We just didn't have enough time." And he spoke of the dream of building a special place in Todos Santos and Baja, which would be a warm place for his large blended family together, a place where his grandchildren could learn to surf. Pretty hard to do in Winnipeg. This conversation, which turned out to be our last, illuminated the splendid day that Jim brought to the world. I want to close by reciting the words of Raymond Carver, the great American short story writer who wrote his own epitaph by way of an inner dialogue, and it goes like this. And did you get what you wanted from this life? Even so, I did. And what did you want? To call myself beloved, to feel myself beloved on this earth. Jim Carr loved deeply, was loved in return. He fought the good fight. He finished his race. He kept the faith. Amen, Brother Jim.
Deep and heartfelt thank you to the Honorable Lloyd Axworthy, Jim's dear friend, for sharing those stories and tremendous words of tribute. Mr. Axworthy's comments remind me of a piece of Jewish wisdom that I'd like to share before we introduce our next singer and then the final speaker. The idea of making our time on earth matter. Two little nuggets, two pieces of Jewish wisdom. The first is that the rabbis would say it's better for people to go to a memorial service, to a funeral, than to go to a banquet hall. Because at the banquet hall, we distract ourselves by only immersing ourselves in the pleasures of life. That a funeral, it forces us to face the reality we all too often try to ignore. That our time on earth is short. Their point, the rabbis, was that a life can only be truly appreciated and well lived by someone who appreciates its brevity. The second piece is that funeral services, memorial services remind us that we are all destined to die. We share that with all who have ever lived, all who ever will be. Death will come. We cannot enter into judgment with it. Our questions of why will always go unanswered. The only way we have to rob death of the ultimate victory is to live our life genuinely, truly, with love for others, love for our craft, so that when death does come, it takes us from one corner of the world that was made better by the simple fact that we were in it. Already today, already in the last week, we have come to appreciate that the corner in which Jim Carr resided and worked and loved was certainly made better by his being in it. It's now my honor to call forward Helen White, who will sing for us.
I love how your eyes close whenever you kiss me, and love how you miss me. I love how you miss me. I love the way you always treat me so tenderly, but darling, most of all, I love how you love me. I love how your heart beats whenever I hold you. I love when you think of me without being told to. I love the way you always touch me so tenderly,
I thank you again to Helen White. I'm told I Love How You Love Me was Jim and Colleen's wedding song. One of the things that came up when I met with Jim's family in advance of Wednesday's service and spoke with him again, preparing for today, was the sentiment that's difficult. It was difficult for me to find the right way to say it, so I'll say it the way the family said it. Jim Carr loved a good funeral. It's funny, but I knew what he meant. I couldn't find another way to say it. The point was, when you see a person through the perspective of people who knew him or her intimately, who loved that person, when you learn things you didn't know about someone you thought you knew pretty well, when you could see the impact that person had, not just on you, which you knew, but on others, it's a tremendous feeling. Hopefully, to this point, we have done justice and provided Jim Carr with a good funeral. Our next speaker, it would be amazing if he could speak at all funerals, but only for certain people who have a special impact and a special role does this happen. It's my honor to call forward the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada.
In the House of Commons this week, Parliament paid tribute to Jim. Across the aisle, from every party, members spoke of Jim's decency and his kindness. Marty Morantz, Jim's fellow Winnipegger from the Conservative Party, reflected on how insightful and thoughtful Jim always was. He talked about him as a bridge builder and a nation builder. Richard Cannings from the NDP said he was the best kind of politician, someone who truly believed in serving his community, his province, and his country. Elisabeth May, du Parti Vert, nous a raconté qu'à chaque fois qu'elle voyait Jim à la Chambre et qu'elle lui demandait comment il allait, il répondait toujours « Chaque jour est une bénédiction ». La députée du Bloc québécois, Christina Michaud, l'a bien dit, Jim Carr était un homme politique qui savait écouter et qui, nous l'avons vu la semaine dernière, dans son dernier discours, respectait ses adversaires politiques. Nous le respections en retour. But all of you here today already knew this about Jim. For 7 years, you shared him with us in Parliament and with all Canadians. This week, we felt his absence deeply. While member after member spoke, a vase of white flowers occupied his front row desk in the House of Commons. Jim will be missed by our team. Jim believed in the work we were doing and dedicated himself to it until the very end. He brought his reliable prairie pragmatism to the cabinet table, whether as Natural Resources Minister, International Trade Minister, or Special Representative to the Prairies. Il se montrait toujours généreux envers ses collègues et offrait des conseils avisés chaque fois qu'on le lui demandait. Il était un ami à énormément de gens. Il était un parlementaire remarquable. This week, we are heartbroken. Jim will be missed by by the people who had honor of working with him and learning from him. De nombreux jeunes viennent travailler à Ottawa et c'est un travail difficile. Mais Jim a instauré dans son bureau un environnement empreint de chaleur et de gentillesse. Il a donné à tous les jeunes qui l'encadraient un sentiment profond d'appartenance, non seulement à l'équipe, mais en service à ce pays extraordinaire. I had a chance to meet with many of Jim's staff this week, and their devotion to him was something else. But that was, of course, just the kind of guy Jim was. He engendered loyalty for all the very best reasons. I've reflected a couple of times this week on the fact that he made me feel so special, that he had special attention for me, that he thought about me, that he encouraged me, he knew exactly what to say and ask after my feelings, and after inspired me to continue doing difficult things in difficult moments. And then this week I discovered it wasn't just me, it was everyone. I felt less special, but I felt special at the time. But it was a gift he had that is just extraordinary to discover and challenges me and us all to try and have even a bit of that impact on everyone around us. Jim will also be missed by Canadians. He loved this country so much. He loved the prairies. He loved his hometown of Winnipeg. And he had a lot of hope for the future of this country. It's why he put his name on a ballot. It's why he worked so hard up until the very end. As people said, his final act in Parliament was to pass his Building a Green Prairie Economy Act. L'adoption de ce projet de loi représentait pour lui un triomphe personnel, mais c'était aussi une victoire pour notre pays. Il voulait aider les gens des prairies à saisir les possibilités que présente la nouvelle économie, rendre le processus décisionnel plus inclusif et permettre à un plus grand nombre de personnes d'y participer, bâtir un avenir meilleur pour notre pays et laisser, surtout, laisser à nos enfants et nos petits-enfants un monde plus sûr, plus sain et plus prospère. Et cette semaine, le projet de loi de Jim, la loi sur le développement d'une économie verte dans les prairies, a reçu la sanction royale et maintenant une loi du Canada. But most of all, Jim will be missed by his family. Ben, thank you for your beautiful words. Colleen, thank you for letting him come to Ottawa and dedicate himself so completely to the work we did together. Rachel, Rebecca, Kiernan, Daniel, and Jesse, Michelle, Sophia, and Markian, I know he was so proud of all of you. In the sweep of grief, it can sometimes be hard to find solace. But you all know just how many people are grateful to have served alongside Jim, and that Canadians are all of us better for his devotion to this country. Of course, Jim still had a lot more to say than to do. Cancer took him from us far too soon. But Jim leaves behind a legacy that's more than most of us would dare ask of a life. A man of the arts, a man of letters, a man of faith, a man of service, a gentleman in every sense of the word. a loving husband, a proud father, a devoted grandfather. Jim was, and ever will be, a truly great Canadian. Colleen, it is with great honor that I will now present to you and your family the Canadian flag that flew on the Peace Tower on Monday, the day Jim left us, and a copy of his bill that received royal assent on Thursday and that will help ensure Jim's contributions to Canada live on. May his memory be a blessing.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. On behalf of the family, I want to thank everyone for your attendance again today and acknowledge as well the many people who have traveled from out of town when our city doesn't exactly show the best in December, so we appreciate you being here. The family also wanted me to thank everyone from across the country for the outpouring of messages that have, well, they have captured so much of what has already been said today. Affection, love, respect. The family wanted me to express their deep appreciation for all of these messages and everyone's continued support during this difficult time. We want to thank the Centennial Concert Hall for hosting us here. As Ben mentioned in his eulogy, a truly fitting location for us to have a community gathering to say farewell to Jim Carr. Music was, of course, one of Jim's passions. And shortly before he passed, he established a foundation, the Jim Carr Foundation, through the Winnipeg Foundation, that is designed to support young musicians who are looking to embark upon a career in classical music, and also a foundation that will continue to bring classical music into community places. A truly worthwhile endeavor. This, coupled with his political contributions and just the way he carried himself in his personal relationships, will indeed, as the Prime Minister said, help to ensure that Jim's legacy lives on. For after all, in my tradition, the Jewish tradition, the rabbis teach that there are three crowns. The crown of priesthood, the crown of Torah, and the crown of royalty. But they emphasize that there is a fourth crown that exceeds them all. The crown of a good name. For though our time on earth may be short, a good name, a good reputation endures forever. Thank you again to the family for the honor of being here with all of you today. We will conclude this memorial service for Jim Carr with his favorite piece of classical music, the second movement of Beethoven's 7th Symphony. We ask that you wait until the family can be excused before you leave your seats. And we again thank you for being here today for Jim.